You are listening to Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour, a podcast released on the first 3 Wednesdays of the month. Family crisis, relationship crisis, addiction crisis, no two crisis situations are the same. They vary by family, individual, and relationship. They can encompass complex family dynamics, emotional distress, anger issues, and entitlements, and often involve substance abuse. This podcast addresses these issues and others surrounding the addiction epidemic currently plaguing this country and the world. There is hope and help.
Are you stuck, scared, or unsure of what to do next? If a situation with a loved one, spouse, or even a child has started to spiral, possibly becoming dangerous or threatening, it's time to seek help. My name is Scott H. Silverman. I help families navigate crisis situations. I'm the person you turn to in order to get you and your loved ones unstuck.
Welcome back to Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour. This is Michael Glenn Moore. I'm Scott's co-host. And today we have another special guest. Scott, why don't you tell us about it?
Okay. Well, Michael, how are you doing? How's everything in your world?
Doing pretty good. They finally started work on my house, so I'm getting my roof repaired. Fortunately, they're not doing that today. This is a Saturday, so I don't have that noise, but it's great that they finally started. So we have an end in sight.
Okay, so that chainsaw noise that I'm hearing is in my own head?
Yes, it is.
Well, makes sense. It is a Saturday. Well, I'm excited to be here today. Again, to all who are listening and watching today, welcome to our happy hour. Our goal each week is to try to find the change agents, the leaders in our community, the influencers. Sometimes we've got a knucklehead or two, but today is somebody who's not one of those, fortunately. But I want to welcome our guests again, and make sure you've got my phone number. It's 619-993-2738. You know, it's interesting. People say, you really shouldn't put your phone number out there. You know what? My phone number's out there. Text or call me. Anything I can do to help. Anything we can do to help your family, anything we can do to help get your loved ones access to the highest level of support possible in this environment specifically, text or call me anytime. I'm going to put my phone up when I'm sleeping, but I'll get your information and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. 619-993-2738. That's my PSA for the morning. All right. I'd like to welcome our guest, William D. Gore. He's the sheriff of San Diego County. And he's not just a sheriff. I think of Bill as a friend. And I'm going to ask him an unusual question to speak a little bit about our relationship over the years, which he may or may not remember or may or may not want to talk about in a public domain. Anyway, William D. Gore, I'm going to read a couple things here because this man's history is stunning. And he's been a committed individual to not only in law enforcement, but to create systemic change and to work on the kind of things that take place that aren't easy for leaders in law enforcement to do, especially in an environment like today. We're going to talk a little bit more specifically about that. So he's the 29th sheriff of San Diego County, started back in July 3rd of 2009, oversees roughly 4,300 employees. And I believe this bio's a little old because I remember his budget was close to $1 billion at right now and continuing to grow. And the reason is our community continues to grow and so do the issues. So Bill Gore is a guy that not only has spent time as a San Diego County sheriff, but also was in the FBI, also worked for the DA and the FBI Cybercrime Squad. He sits on numerous boards, works very, very closely with the San Diego County Police Chiefs and Sheriffs Association. He's also an advisory member on the Safe Homes Coalition, which is the nonprofit that I run that helps remove unused and unsafe medication from the home. Works on Star Pal, MAD, and the San Diego Gang Commission, which is where he and I got a little closer years ago. I was one of the few civilians on that, which was an awesome opportunity to learn about it. Bill also went to the same high school, or actually I went to the same high school Bill went to because he's, I think, a day or two older than I am. His wife was one of the first female FBI agents in the United States. He and his wife, Natalie, have a grown son named Ryan. So with that, what I'd like to do, Bill, I want to turn this over to you. I call him Bill because I owe him money. It just, it's the way it works. But the sheriff is a very well-respected individual. And, not only is he respected, and I want to be careful about this, he's also very well-liked. He's also very popular. I'm also on the Honorary Deputy Sheriffs, which is a nonprofit that supports the Sheriff's Department. So I've had a chance to intimately get to know a lot of his leadership team. And in San Diego, one of the few communities where law enforcement Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney, and the DA's office, and all the different first responders work together in a way that, in my opinion, is exemplary, and it sets the example of how law enforcement should be working together with the criminal justice system and even the treatment community. We're going to talk a bit more about that as well. So, Bill, I want to give the mic to you, and I want you just to share with everybody what it is I didn't mention that you think we should all know about Sheriff William Gore.
Well, thanks. Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here. You kind of hit on one of the most important things, I think, right at the end of your introduction, your kind introduction. In my 32 years in the FBI, I had the opportunity to really work all over the United States, East Coast, Midwest, Northwest, and I finally took me 27 years of those 32 to get back to San Diego. And I worked in some really, good cities, good metropolitan areas. But what I find unique about San Diego, and what I think San Diego is so fortunate to have, is that collaboration and cooperation between all levels of law enforcement, not just the sheriff's department getting along with the police department. It's local, state, and federal all coming together to look at regionalizing crime problems. I always say that the bad guys don't care if they're in La Mesa, El Cajon, San Diego, or one of our other communities around the county. And to the extent we let these artificial, jurisdictional boundaries impact good law enforcement, shame on us. And we don't. We take, like say, crime problems, whether it's cyber crimes, drugs, organized crime, violent crimes, and come together in task force environments where appropriate and address them not only at the investigative level, but at the prosecutive level with United States attorneys and local district attorneys. They're just not a duplication of effort or reinventing the wheel. And I credit that level of cooperation and collaboration to a crime rate that really is at 50-year lows.
I think it's low because a lot of people are still staying home too as well, and things have changed a lot. So with that being said, tell me, there's a lot of civil unrest, and there also is a lot of issues going on in our community. Kind of speak to, from your perspective, what law enforcement, criminal justice is doing in our community that maybe prevents us from having some of the escalation that seems to be going on. And, an example like a city like Portland, which I think half the population came from San Diego over the years. So what is it that's happening that you think differently here?
We've had our issues. There's no doubt about it. But I think we were one of the leaders in community relations. I go back to my predecessor, Sheriff Collender, who before that was chief of police in San Diego for 13 years. And before that, back in the 60s, was one of their first, I think it was a sergeant lieutenant at the time, that stood up their community relations bureau, which was unheard of in law enforcement at that time. And so I think community policing, community oriented policing has been really ingrained in all of our deputies, all of our local police officers. So we have those relationships. What I find frustrating, and all of us find frustrating, I'm sure, throughout law enforcement, is that we've got, I think, 750,000 local law enforcement officers in this country. And there's going to be mistakes made. There's going to be, hopefully they're mistakes of the mind, not of the heart. And the discouraging part for all of us is, no matter if it happens in Minneapolis or St. Louis or New York, there's this outcry against the 750,000 other law enforcement officers in the country. I remember George Floyd in Minneapolis. That was an action that was condemned by law enforcement, all levels of government, all over the country, chiefs, sheriffs, and yet what happened there, I think the representation was that happens everywhere. It was, in my opinion, an aberration. Not saying we haven't had mistakes that have been made here, but I think that the instant age of communication, cable news, social media age that we live in, everything is immediately, cast throughout the United States, to where we're dealing with issues we had no responsibility for whatsoever, and things I think tend to get magnified. In the last 3 months, what's especially, I think, disappointing is the level of engagement, the shouting past each other. It's really difficult to have a conversation about what we're doing here, what we're doing different than other parts of the country. and I know going back to the Chiefs and Sheriff's organization you're talking, we've kind of taken a listening mode. And if advocates in the community come forth with a proposal and we just say, but yeah, we're already doing that, it turns into an argument. So what we've tried to do is take all of it in, listen, and then go back in an organized forum of saying, we agree with this, and here's what we're doing. Here's something we're working on. And maybe these issues over here, we don't agree with it, and be able to explain why we don't agree with that. But you have to have an environment in which you can have that dialogue. We're working very hard to establish those venues, whether it's through a group called Pastors on Point, another group of Black ministers called Standing in the Gap, individual relationships with the ACLU, NAACP, Urban League, to get law enforcement, not only just the leaders, but the rank and file in those forums to have those discussions. I think we're getting to that point now in the dialogue, hopefully.
Well, don't forget about my people. Now that Yom Kippur is over with, my people are free for some meetings as well. And, we love meetings. We love meetings.
PDL is an integral part, as you can imagine, in all of our conversations.
That was a joke, Bill. So, when you use that figure, 750,000 across the country, and there's 330 million people in our country. When you think about that ratio, I'm just wondering, my wife's, in real estate, and I'm thinking about lawyers. If you added up those numbers, we probably have a lot more. And when I don't know what it costs to train somebody, but I've heard at some point the expense of training as a first responder, just like somebody who's in the military, it's a big dollar amount. And when you think about the ratio of that many people that they have to manage or be aware of or be ready and trained for, it's almost like a formula for if anything can go wrong, it probably would. When you think about the human issues that are aligned with all the different things that law enforcement has to bump into on a daily basis. Plus, they wear a uniform and a badge, so they're clearly marked by the community, and people know who they are when they're walking down the street. I mean, nobody knows who I am. When you're in civilian clothes, they don't have an idea. So when you're profiled like that, what a difficult job to have, number one. Number two, help support them.
We and the challenge we have, and we work very hard at it, is screening people to become peace officers, law enforcement officers in this country. It's a challenging job. There's room for abuse. There's a lot of discretion in law enforcement. And that's why I know here in San Diego, for every 100, we take one deputy for every 100, 115 applicants we get. And there's a screening process, involves background investigations and interviews, psychological screening and psychological tests to try to weed out that racist that's joining law enforcement for the wrong reason. I'll match our screening process for peace officers with any other profession in the country. Not to say it's perfect, but we work very hard at recruiting and attracting the best people we can in our community. It's a big challenge for us.
Well, and the work I do in treatment and behavioral health, and I've met people that you see them one day and then they start doing some work, or they go with some trauma that's untreated. Things can erupt. I don't care how good your screening process is. Things that can trigger people over time. So let's swing on to something easy. You're running the second largest jail system in the state of California. That has to be a lot of fun. What's that like?
Well, it's challenging, as you can imagine.
No, I can't imagine. That's why I'm asking the question, Bill.
Like so many issues in society, whether it's drug abuse and the lack of, I think, the proper amount of attention paid to that by our society, mental health issues that I think have been neglected by society, our elected officials, our legislators, all those issues that law enforcement are forced to deal with on the street or in our jails after these individuals are arrested. You've heard me say before, Scott, a third of my inmate population, which prior to COVID was about anywhere from 5,500 to 6,000 inmates a day, a third of those inmates were on some type of psychotropic drug. These are individuals that have some mental health issues. And people say they don't belong in jail. I couldn't agree more. They don't belong, but where are they going to go? Where are the mental health hospitals that used to be here 50 and 60 years ago? Where's the psychiatric urgent care facilities where the police officer on the beat or the deputy sheriff can take this person that's having usually a drug and mental health, co-occurring disorder issue in the streets of San Diego. Those facilities aren't there, so they take them to my jail. I think we do a good job, but I'm really tired of dealing with issues that I would like to see handled better in the community. There's been a lot of talk with the civil unrest about forming teams of social scientists and counselors to respond to mental health calls in the community instead of police. I love it. Great. Let's go for it. And we have that in San Diego to a certain extent with our psychiatric emergency response teams, PERT clinicians. We have 72. I could use another 72 in San Diego County. I'd love to send them along with deputies and police officers to all those calls, but there's not enough of them to go around. And the thought that you're going to be able to extract law enforcement from these mental health calls completely is unrealistic. Let's go into this with our eyes open. Let's be realistic about this approach. These social scientists, counselors are not going to go into these volatile situations without a peace officer to calm the situation, to bring order to it, so they can come in then and have those conversations, those counseling sessions with the person that's having the behavioral health issue. So I think it's got to be a team effort. I fully support some of the initiatives that have come in out there to keep them out of my jails. Sometimes it's not going to work, but we work very hard in our jails to give people the tools to get them clean and sober and give them the counseling and rehabilitation, cognitive behavioral training they need, so that when they leave our jails, they have a chance of succeeding back in the community. So they're not just in a revolving door coming back to our jails. Scott, you're well aware of criminal justice realignment about 10 years ago that shifted a lot of felons from state prisons to county jails. When that happened in 2011, the recidivism rate in the state of California and the prison system was 72%. It was just a revolving door. Within 3 years of being released from state prison, they were right back in there. We've lowered that recidivism rate now to about 34%. So, and that's with a lot of hard work. That's counseling. That's the key in there is the cognitive behavioral training that gets into the thought process that got the person in the jail to start with, and trying to change that, and then give them some skills so they can be self-reliant when they leave our facilities. And that means partnering with community organizations. Maybe that person they leave, our facility needs a sober living bed in the community. So we partner with groups like, I think you've heard of it, Scott, Second Chance, that runs sober living homes in our community. So we can find these people and get them the wraparound service they need when they leave our jail. So it's a big partnership, but I think government can do more to keep them out of my jails to start with.
I don't disagree with that, but I also want to add that I think that it's going to require the community at large, when they look at the approach that you're talking about, because you talk about 72 individuals working with the PERT team right now that you mentioned. If I'm not mistaken, half of those were just hired in the last 2 years with new funding.
That's right.
When you look at the last 5 years, just the last 5 years, the trajectory of increased issues, and I know PERT pretty well, I've worked with him for decades, that over 10 years ago, the primary contact call, and I remember when I did my ride-along with one of your captain's teams out of Spring Valley area, the discussion was that the average person that they were talking to, it was 10 plus years ago, when they knocked on the door and there was an issue, it was mostly around substance abuse, alcohol, self-medication. And now 95% of those are behavioral health, mental health issues. And I'll tell you, I'll correct you on something. You said those individuals, they won't be able to go in there. Well, no, they'll be able to go in. They just won't get out. I mean, you can't go into a violent situation, specifically domestic violence. It's one of the most high risk, I think, entries that your law enforcement makes, and be able to just talk somebody down who has a knife in their hand, or, is raging on PCP, or is on fentanyl or heroin, or hasn't slept in 4 days because they've been taking methamphetamine. So I was on a Zoom a couple weeks ago, and I used the word dope fiend, and somebody chatted with me privately, to be totally honest, I want to give you feedback. Like they said, we're not using that term anymore. I said, well, we are in the street. I mean, the people who know people, peer to peer, we talk about it. So, I think when you factor in all the things that are going on right now, and I also believe that we're going to see some acceleration in the problems before they tend to calm down. But crime is coming down. It's good to see. I think it was.
Scott, you're very familiar with, obviously, with with drug treatment programs. Since the last 20 years, anybody that will listen to me, I've talked about you can't arrest your way out of the drug problem in this country.
Never.
And as long as we keep, addressing the supply side, and not address the demand side. When I was in the FBI, I had 250 agents here in the San Diego office. We were focusing on the Ariana Felix drug cartel, and I could have put all 250 working on that case or those drug cases. And unless you address the demand for those drugs on this side, we're never going to have an impact. And I would, to the chagrin of a lot of my counterparts, I'd say, take half of my budget and put it into education and treatment programs. So this is a big border we got, whether it's the Mexican border, the coast of California. If the demand is here, they will find a way to get those drugs in. And it's sexy to be a lawmaker and be tough on crime and all this good stuff. But I think we see what the impact it really has on the overall drug problem in this country. We're going the wrong way.
Well, and, I'm an SME here in San Diego, subject matter expert, and I talk about this all the time, on television and radio when I can. And, no one talks about the dark web. And the dark web, I listen to kids today. They can go online. They can use some form of electronic money like Bitcoin. They can order whatever they want that's on the planet. It can be shipped to them. And guess what? They don't have to go through a border. They don't have to go through an airport. They don't have to go through a train station. It comes right through USPS.
It's delivered right to their door.
It comes from big containers that are dropped off in large states, and then they mail the packages individually. And to your point about demand, I mean, if I was a manufacturer of any substance offshore anywhere in the world, I wouldn't ship anywhere else but the U.S. because the consumer is here and they're hungry for it and they're demanding it and they want it and they've got money to spend on it. So clearly, someone was talking the other day about the Portugal, example, how they've done some things there that have really been effective. It was legalization, but I don't want to get into that today. So let me go back to you and San Diego.
Okay.
Because it's our home and there's so much going on globally right now. So tell us about the pieces that you would like to maybe work on. And you've mentioned some of them because we have just a couple minutes left. And I'm going to go to my magic wand question. If you had a magic wand and you could go to the board of supervisors and the mayor and the influencers and all those groups and you get them all in the room at the same time, rather than, I said, somebody asked me last month and, I'm working on my new book. How are you going to, I said, I'm not going to go to Rotary clubs and I'm a Rotarian and talk to 17 people a week. There's got to be a better way to get this information out on a platform that gets more people informed, educates more, creates prevention, and that people latch on to reducing this stigma about what it is we really need to do to help the members of our community. So if you had a magic wand, Bill, what would you like to do?
Well, I think so much of so many of the issues we deal with revolve around that behavioral health issue we've talked about, that and the drugs issue. The other issues of cyber crimes, we can develop the expertise and come together as a law enforcement community and address those issues, which we're doing. But to see social issues, underlying social issues of I think, behavioral health and substance abuse, and then combining those two that we deal with. And I think there's some good legislation, good discussion at the board level. I think people are starting to recognize it. It's not unique to San Diego. Every sheriff in the country, every jailer deals with these same issues. It's coming up with, there's a plan to come up with some of these psychiatric urgent care facilities, an alternative to jail. When a family member is having a problem with one of their loved ones acting out, they don't have to call the police. There's somebody that's going to respond that can deal with it and take them maybe someplace other than jail. That's a great step in the right direction.
So not just a traditional detox, but actually kind of like a behavioral health detox, where it's not just somebody who's completely self-medicated, in semi-comatose state, but actually somebody who might be acting out, having an episode, and different than, say, county mental health with their 3-day hold, but someplace where they can be triaged.
Right.
I don't think we actually, because technically the ERs or the emergency departments are where people go, but I can't even get referrals to confidential recovery from the EDs because they tell me if you don't take Medi-Cal, we can't refer clients.
There's I know last year, District Attorney Summer Stephan and I supported a bill looking at the psychiatric urgent care. Supervisor Fletcher is working on putting one, trying to locate one up between UCSD and Scripps Mercy up in Hillcrest. So the plans are there. That more mental health clinicians, PERT clinicians out in the field, I think would be a great angle. Frustration for me, we have detox, we have the serial inebriate center, and yet if the person is acting out of any kind of violent form, they won't take them. So then they come to my jail where we sober them up. There's got to be another place, maybe not a psychiatric urgent care, but a detox facility with security that can also take care of those people if they're acting out until they do sober up, and then be in that position to refer them to resources, not just pat them on the butt and knock them out the door once they're sober, but do that in conjunction with resources that, you can lead them to water, you can't make them drink all the time. I know that, but at least introduce them to the resources to maybe start getting them the help they need.
Right. Plant those seeds. Speaking of, I just remembered something I wanted to share with our audience today. A couple of years ago, NARCAN was being introduced in our community, and naloxone. And NARCAN was, the reversal of an overdose that can be administered initially, I think, with an injection, and then it went to a nasal spray. And if I'm not mistaken, San Diego County Sheriff's Department was the group that actually got on board with it. And I think, if I remember right, you telling me once that you actually had to go to state level to help get the laws changed, or a law changed. So would you tell us about, because that was very proactive, and I know there's big controversy, and people still say, well, if somebody wants to overdose, you might as well just let them. And my attitude is, well, that's like saying, let's don't have sobriety checkpoints. Let's don't have sworn officers in the street. Let's don't have behavioral health supporters. That's that's kind of like, if you don't pick up a drink, you won't have a drinking problem. So tell us about that story.
I hear that from people that don't have a family member that's had an addiction problem or something like that.
They haven't had one. They've been impacted negatively by somebody somewhere, I'm sure of it.
I was at a meeting with the what used to be called the drug czar, the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. He was the acting director at the time. He was from Boston. And he talked about something that they'd done in New England somewhere, might have been Boston, where they were distributing NARCAN, naloxone, to police officers, because we are frequently the first one on scene to an overdose. The medics show up after we're there. And I went back, I said, well, that makes a lot of sense. Let's look at it, because overdoses are becoming more and more prevalent in our community. This was, I want to say, 8 years ago, probably, in my first term as sheriff. And we started looking into it, and there was a law that prohibited us from doing it, peace officers. So we had to go to Sacramento. We got the law changed to allow peace officers to administer NARCAN in case of overdose. We started with a pilot project in our Santee station, and in 6 months, we'd saved 13 lives. And then we took it countywide in our jurisdiction. Now I think in San Diego, most of the local law enforcement agencies issue that NARCAN to our officers, and it's going up and down the state of California. And there's no doubt that we've saved lives. It's not to address the critics. It's not just a matter of we bring them back and dust them off, say, okay, good luck. We try to get them the resources again that they need to break this vicious, disease, this habit they're in, and try to get them the resources. If they don't give it to them, we try to give it to the family members, different avenues, different resources in the community to get them the help they need. So yeah, I'm really proud of that program. I know we've saved lives, and maybe they go back and they overdose again, but I know we've saved lives once, and we've got people that have turned their lives around after coming that close call with death.
I remember being in your office a couple of years ago. I had to sneak in because when you heard I was coming, you put an extra.
You have tight security, Scott.
I know it's very tight. And we were talking about this, and it was like the second or third year the program had been going, because I came to talk to you about how we can be an extension of that. What happens when you give people information when they come out of their overdose, or when you're talking to people at the emergency departments. And at that year, I believe that it was something like 63 people's lives that were saved just by the sheriff's department, just by having that medication on the rigs in case it was needed. And by the way, I'm sure you read the paper literally a week ago, the last week of September. It was said that there are 3 people overdosing at San Diego per day. per day this year, 3 people. And I think that's well over 200% of last year. I don't have the data yet, but we're going into the toughest season for people emotionally to deal with things that take place during the holiday. Plus it's an election year. Plus we have the COVID issues. So
we also started a program that I'm really proud of that has caught on now and gone countywide, and I'm sure it's spread beyond San Diego County, where instead of just trying to save the person that OD'd, go in and assign investigators to track that back, see where maybe that overdose of fentanyl that was laced into his the particular drug he was taking, where that came from. We've had successful cases where we prosecuted and tracked it back to the dealer that had a batch of bad drugs that went out in the community, and you had 3 and 4 and 5 overdoses at a time. And now the DEA Narcotics Task Force has got a special group that just looks at that. So we're not just, dealing with the same problem over, trying to get to the root of it in some of these cases.
Well, and let people know that, there's we call it Operation Relocation, Operation Interruptus, because they're going to sell it no matter what. So but if we can get it out of our community where it can be monitored differently. So tell me, my last question to you, then I'm going to turn it over to Michael, because he usually has the best questions. What can the community do for you? I mean, I'm not speaking for the community, but you know me, you call me anytime, and if something comes up, we always try to work together on it quickly. But if you had a part of the magic wand question, what would you want the community to hear from you right now that you would, dear community, can we ask you to, or may I suggest, what would that look like?
Well, right now, I would like, when I speak to groups, whether it's Rotary, where I say, law enforcement, we are the community. It's not us against you. And that's so sad what I've seen with some of the civil unrest. That's the narrative. It's the cops that are bad. We are the community. We're the Little League coach. We're the ones that in school with your kids. And we're in this together. And if we're going to make our communities better, it's going to take us dialoguing, coming up with mutual solutions to these problems. And I'm not saying there's not problems. I think they get blown out of proportion on occasion, but there are problems. And we're not going to solve these by yelling at each other. We've got to sit down and have a dialogue and work together and agree where we can and see what things we can work on jointly together. And just lower the temperature. As we know, in this country, everything has become so political, and there's unstable people on the far right, and there's unstable people on the far left. And as this rhetoric goes up, we're activating people on both sides. We've seen it with deputy sheriffs shot point blank up in Los Angeles. We've seen it with the right-wing individual Midwest there shooting people at a demonstration. That's not what this country's about. And if we can just talk about these issues in a civil forum, that's the message I'm trying to get out.
That's a good one. I think when we opened, you talked about listening, and when I talk with families, I remind them that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we have to try twice as hard maybe to listen. And I think if we were spending less time talking, and one of the things we used to teach years ago was with folks is if 2 people are talking, nobody's listening.
Boy. Sounds like a debate I recently saw on TV.
Yeah. Michael, where's the wisdom from you? What's the big question of the day from you, young man?
Well, it's pretty basic, but I think if there's bound to be at least one person among our listeners who may want to know. Okay, Bill, what's the difference between a police officer and a sheriff's deputy?
Well, I get that at every speech I give. Basically, there's not one bit of difference between a deputy sheriff and a police officer on the street, but the difference between a sheriff, like me, and a chief of police, it's a lot of differences. A chief of police is responsible, like Dave Neslight in San Diego. Police is for the city of San Diego, 1.3 million people. I police in 9 incorporated cities and unincorporated San Diego County, which is about 1 million people. So I police for about 1 million people, but that's only one of my 3 operational areas. As we've discussed, I already run all the jails in San Diego County. If you're arrested in San Diego County on a state charge, you're going to one of my jails. None of the local jurisdictions have jails. I also am responsible for security in all the courtrooms in San Diego County. It's about 165 courtrooms and all the weapon screening. We screen about 3 million people a year through all of our courthouses in San Diego County. then we have all the regulatory responsibilities of a sheriff that a chief of police doesn't have. We register sex offenders, drug offenders. We do concealed weapons permits, a large regulatory responsibility that falls on the sheriff. Plus, we are the chief law enforcement officer in any county in California responsible for mutual aid. We saw during the recent civil unrest in La Mesa and other places around the county, it's been the sheriff's department. If Chula Vista wants help in a situation, they come to the sheriff's department. We put together maybe just our deputies or deputies and then officers from Escondido, Carlsbad, into a composite team to go in to assist them. Plus, we want a regional crime laboratory, which services everybody in the county except San Diego Police Department. They have their own lab, but they do just the city of San Diego. So it's there's times when Dave Nislight and I have laughed. I said, I'd love to just be responsible for policing, not have all these other issues going on. But it's the deputy on the street that's giving you a ticket is the same as the police officer in San Diego giving you a ticket. And they have responsibilities in jurisdiction. Actually, a peace officer can enforce California law anywhere in the state of California. But we try to stay on our own turf.
Well, you certainly earn your keep. That's a lot to have to deal with. Okay, so do you have a quote to see us out?
Michael, one more quick question for clarity. Bill, and you're elected, correct? You run for election to be nominated and voted in as sheriff. And now is that true across the country where sheriffs are elected and police chiefs are hired as an employee?
Most places, but not all places. It's interesting as you look at sheriffs around the country on the East Coast, Northeast, sheriffs, a lot of them up there might just be jailers, have no law enforcement responsibilities. Some of them are just responsible for serving civil process papers, that type of thing. The further west you come in the United States, then you come into what we are like full service sheriffs, where we do, courts, jails, and law enforcement. There's a certain amount of independence with a sheriff. I work for the people of San Diego County. Although I'm smart enough, I learned this from my predecessor, Bill Colliner. Yeah, the Board of Supervisors, they're not my boss, but they do control the budget. And so it behooves us to work collaboratively with the board also, where a chief of police, there's no doubt, he works for the mayor or the city manager, depending on the form of government. He's appointed, I'm elected. There's a lot more freedom and independence to be a sheriff. The downside is
you have to do everything.
4 years I got to run for office. And it's probably the most distasteful thing I've ever done. I never thought I would run for office. It's not. I enjoy the people part of it, but the bad part is, like I'm sure every elected official will tell you, is asking people for money, and that's sadly the blood of any campaign is raising money. And I find it. I laughed about it. I find it a built-in conflict with law enforcement asking people for money. I said, when I first ran, I said, I've been in law enforcement for 40 years. And I said, I put cops and FBI agents in jail for taking money. Now it's a part of my job description. And it's foreign to me. But anyway, once you get it, it's a great job. It's a 4-year term. There are no term limits on it. I'm in my 3rd term, and very rewarding.
You're going to do it again?
I never say never, Scott, but I don't run till 2022 again.
Oh, you don't have to worry about that. All right, Michael, sorry, back to you, buddy.
I was just going to ask him to go ahead and see us out with his quote.
Yeah, I thought about that, and I thought, I don't have any really catchy quote, but I like to refer to, it's a little plaque. It's about that big, and it's been on the front of my desk now for probably 35 years. And it's really simple. And it says attitude in big letters down below it. It says is everything. And it's so true in your professional life, your personal life. I've worked with so many people that the glass is always half empty, and they're determined to be miserable themselves and make everybody around them miserable. And I've always thought that whether it's in my work life, my personal life, professional, the glass is half full kind of guy, and go into things with a positive attitude. It's been a good, like I say, given me a lot of comfort over the years. I think it's worked well for the people around me that I've had the privilege to lead, because I hope I spread that attitude throughout the organization. My dad dad, when I was growing up, he went through the San Diego Police Department and retires as number 2 man. And he used to laugh saying, you know, this whole management thing, it's not rocket science. You know, as you go up in organizations, you just try to treat people the way you'd like to be treated yourself. I'm like, that's pretty clever, right? And I've gone to a lot of management schools myself, and that's kind of a guiding theme through a lot of them. And let's not overcomplicate it. You know, go in things with a positive attitude and treat other people like you'd like to be treated, and you'll be successful, and the organization you lead will be successful.